James had never felt more out of place than he did that evening. The upscale rooftop venue in downtown Chicago was a dazzling sight, the city skyline glowing behind a sea of well-dressed professionals. The air buzzed with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses as Emily's colleagues mingled effortlessly, engaged in lively conversations. But for James, the room might as well have been a foreign country. He was a hard-working small business owner, used to rolling up his sleeves and solving problems with his hands. The smooth-talking, corporate atmosphere that came so naturally to Emily felt suffocating to him. What made it worse was how different Emily seemed tonight. She had been unusually excited about this event, spending extra time getting ready, brushing off his casual questions about who would be attending. Now, as he stood near the bar nursing a drink, he watched her weave through the crowd like she belonged to another world, a world that had no room for him. She barely acknowledged his presence, flashing a bright, practiced smile at her colleagues while keeping her back turned to him. A quiet but undeniable distance settled in his gut, something he hadn't felt before. It was then that he noticed something even more unsettling. The way people glanced in his direction, whisper among themselves before turning away with barely concealed smirks. He wasn't imagining it. There was something in the air, an unspoken tension that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He was debating whether to call it a night or confront Emily about her distant behavior when she finally approached him. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man James had never met, but instinctively disliked. He had the kind of confidence that felt performative, exaggerated, meant to establish dominance. His posture was relaxed, but the way he positioned himself, just a little too close to Emily, set off every alarm in James's mind. Then came the final confirmation, a casual touch. Jake, as Emily introduced him, placed a hand on her lower back with the ease of someone who had done it before. "So, you're her husband," Jake said, his tone laced with something James immediately recognized, mockery. James felt his jaw tighten, his grip around his glass firm. Before he could respond, Jake smirked and added, "I'm going to dance with her now." It was a statement, not a request. But what shattered James wasn't Jake's arrogance. It was Emily's reaction. Instead of laughing it off or at least acknowledging James in some way, she simply said, "You don't need his permission." Her voice was light, almost playful, as if the idea of respecting her husband's feelings was a joke. Then, turning to Jake, she added, "Come on." Something inside James cracked. The words didn't just sting, they gutted him. It wasn't just about the act itself. It was about how effortlessly she dismissed him in front of everyone. It was about how she had made it clear, in front of all her colleagues, that his feelings didn't matter. Jake, emboldened by Emily's indifference, took things a step further. He turned to James, his smirk deepening, and sneered, "You don't own her, buddy. I'm going to dance with her, and maybe even more." The room around James seemed to fade, his vision narrowing onto the smug face in front of him. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, his fists curling so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He wasn't the kind of man to resort to violence, but something primal inside him was roaring to be let out. Jake placed his hand on Emily's arm, leading her toward the dance floor, and she let him. She didn't even glance back at James. Every step they took away from him was like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. The humiliation was unbearable, the betrayal suffocating. He had walked into this party as Emily's husband, but in this moment, he felt like nothing more than a forgotten afterthought. Then, as he watched them move together on the dance floor, his worst fears were confirmed. Jake wasn't just dancing with her. He was pulling her close, his hands lingering too long on her waist, his touch far too familiar. And Emily, she wasn't resisting. She wasn't pushing him away. The world around James blurred in red. Then, Jake crossed a line no man should ever cross in front of a husband. With an exaggerated smirk aimed directly at James, he slid his hands beneath the fabric of Emily's blouse, his fingers tracing along her back, his movements slow and deliberate. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even the background chatter seemed to die as all eyes turned toward the unfolding scene. James's restraint shattered. The humiliation, the anger, the raw betrayal, all of it boiled over. He stormed across the room, his voice low and filled with something dangerous as he growled, "Get your hands off my wife." The crowd parted, murmurs spreading like wildfire. But Jake didn't back away. Instead, he leaned in even closer, his lips brushing against Emily's ear as if daring James to react. "What are you even going to do about it?" Jake taunted, his voice dripping with arrogance. James's hand shook, but not with fear, with fury. His entire body was coiled with barely restrained violence. And then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled back his jacket just enough for Jake to see what was concealed beneath it. Silence. The air in the room shifted, the light-hearted party atmosphere evaporating in an instant. Every eye was on them. The weight of James's presence, his warning, was unmistakable. Step away from her. Now! For a brief second, even Jake hesitated. The confidence wavered. But he was too proud, too emboldened by the attention of the crowd, by the alcohol swimming in his veins. He let out a sharp, condescending laugh and sneered. "What's the matter, James?" Afraid she might enjoy this more than she ever enjoyed you. The final nail in the coffin. James's blood boiled to a breaking point, and in that moment, there was no turning back. Emily, caught in the middle, didn't move, didn't speak. Her expression was unreadable, her silence louder than any word she could have said. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. And James! He was done holding back. Jake leaned in closer to Emily, his smug expression daring James to react. The audacity in his eyes was too much for James to bear. Without hesitation, driven by a surge of rage, James stepped forward and threw a punch, his fist connecting squarely with Jake's jaw. The impact sent Jake staggering backward, crashing into a nearby table with a loud thud. Gasps filled the room as the crowd reacted. Some recoiled in shock, while others instinctively moved to intervene. Jake clutched his face, glaring up at James, his earlier arrogance now replaced by anger and humiliation. A deep bruise was already forming on his jaw, a visible mark of the power behind James's strike. Yet, despite how hard he had hit, James knew he had held back. He could have done far worse. Jake's confidence had shattered in an instant, his public persona crumbling under the weight of the moment. He had been trying to impress the crowd, but now, he was nothing more than a man exposed, his bravado proven to be just a mask. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as security rushed in, swiftly moving to take control of the escalating situation. Dazed and struggling to regain his composure, Jake was dragged away, his pride in tatters. Whispers of disbelief rippled through the guests, their judgmental stares following him as he was escorted out. The cocky grin he had worn all evening was gone, replaced by a scowl of defeat. His departure marked the end of his arrogance. But for James, the confrontation had only just begun. As Jake disappeared from view, Emily suddenly erupted. Her voice, sharp with anger and desperation, cut through the tension. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned on James, fury overtaking any gratitude he might have expected. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted, her voice trembling. "You've ruined everything." Instead of acknowledging Jake's inappropriate behavior or her own involvement, Emily shifted all the blame onto James. She painted herself as a victim, making it seem as though James had overreacted. Her accusations came rapidly, each word laced with resentment. She berated him in front of everyone, accusing him of embarrassing her, of making a scene. The focus of the room shifted once more. What had started as a confrontation between James and Jake had now become something much deeper. The unraveling of James and Emily's marriage, playing out in front of their colleagues. The pitying glances and judgmental whispers only worsened James's emotional turmoil. His fists remained clenched at his sides, but the fight was no longer physical. It was now about something far more painful, the realization that his marriage had already been broken long before that night. In the days that followed, the full truth came to light. Jake's behavior at the party hadn't been a fleeting moment of arrogance. It was part of a long-running affair between him and Emily. As James pieced together the clues, everything suddenly made sense. The unusual excitement Emily had displayed leading up to the event, the stolen glances between her and Jake, the way her co-workers had reacted. It was clear that nearly everyone at her workplace had known. The humiliation James had felt that night only deepened as he uncovered the extent of betrayal. But rather than allowing it to consume him, it fueled his determination. He refused to be manipulated into staying in a relationship built on lies. Emily's actions didn't just destroy their marriage. They also ruined her reputation at work. Word of the affair spread quickly, and as more details emerged, she found herself ostracized. The colleagues who once admired her now kept their distance, unwilling to associate with someone who had caused such a public scandal. Jake, too, faced consequences. His behavior at the party led to reports being filed with HR, and within weeks he was fired. The downfall of their affair was just as public as the confrontation that had exposed it, leaving both of them to face the wreckage of their choices. For James, the path forward was clear. He filed for divorce immediately, refusing to let Emily's betrayal define him. The legal battle was grueling, but there was a sense of satisfaction in knowing that his decisions were guided by integrity, while hers had led to her downfall. Though the pain of betrayal lingered, it came with a newfound strength, a clarity that allowed him to reclaim his dignity. Looking back, James recognized that the events of that night had been a turning point. It had been painful, but it had also been necessary. He had learned the most valuable lesson of all, the importance of self-respect. Staying in a relationship where he was disrespected would have only diminished his sense of worth. By walking away, he had chosen himself, no matter how difficult that decision had been. He now understood that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that save you. No one should feel obligated to stay in a relationship where they are mistreated, whether it's with a partner, a friend, or anyone else. Letting go of toxic people isn't just about ending a relationship. It's about making room for healthier opportunities and a better future. In his final reflection, James acknowledged the pain, but he also embraced the strength it had given him. He had learned that self-respect isn't something you wait for others to give you. It's something you claim for yourself. As he shared his story, he left his audience with a powerful truth. You can't control someone's loyalty, but you can control how much of yourself you're willing to lose for them. That realization changed everything for him. He couldn't make Emily be faithful, but he could decide how much of his dignity he was willing to sacrifice for a relationship that had already failed. For James, that lesson became the foundation of his healing. Through betrayal, he had learned that the most important thing wasn't holding on to someone who didn't value him. It was protecting his own sense of self. Moving forward, that truth remained with him. Love and loyalty were important, but never at the cost of his own self-worth. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't a fight for someone to stay. It's to walk away, knowing that you deserve better.